People say the coldest thing is not the biting New York winter wind, but the smile of a man you once loved right before he tries to destroy you again. I did not attend my reunion for nostalgia. I went to witness the funeral of my reputation hosted by my ex-husband. Little did he know. The man holding my hand carried a death sentence for his career. One lie and a truth worth billions are about to explode. My name is Juniper Hollis, though for the last 4 years, the world, or at least the very small, private part of it that I allow inside, has known me as Juniper Vane. Standing here, pressing my forehead against the cold, floor-to-ceiling glass of our penthouse overlooking Central Park, you would think I felt like a queen surveying her kingdom, but I did not. Below me, the city was a grid of electric light and ambition, alive and breathing in the humid summer night, inside me. However, there was only a stagnant, suffocating silence. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a structure collapses. The groaning of steel beams giving way under a weight they were never meant to bear. The source of this impending collapse lay on the marble kitchen island behind me. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope, ripped open with a jagged tear that betrayed my trembling hands. Inside was a card printed on thick cardstock, with gold-embossed lettering that seemed to mock the very air I breathed. Sterling University, School of Architecture, Class of 2014, 10-year reunion. And there, printed in a slightly larger, bolder font, was the name that still had the power to make my breath hitch in my throat: keynote speaker Silas Thorne. I closed my eyes, and the luxury of my current life, the 5,000-square-foot apartment, the imported Italian marble. The scent of fresh lilies in the foyer vanished. In its place, the gray, damp walls of a cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn materialized. My mind did not just remember the past, it relived it. This was the curse of my memory. The reason why I spent twice a week talking to a therapist who specialized in complex trauma. 8 years. It has been 8 years since I signed the divorce papers. But the theft happened 2 years before that. The memory washed over me. Not as a fading picture, but as a physical sensation. I was 22, exhausted, smelling of stale coffee and graphite. Staring at the blueprints for the Sanctuary Project. It was my thesis, my soul on paper. It was a revolutionary design for sustainable urban housing that utilized vertical gardens as structural supports. I had spent 6 months sleeping 4 hours a night to perfect it. And then I remembered Silas standing over me. Back then, he was just my boyfriend, a charismatic student with a smile that could charm the sun out of the sky, but with a portfolio that lacked depth. I remembered his hand on my shoulder, heavy, possessive. I remembered waking up the morning of the submission deadline to find my laptop missing. I remembered the panic, the bile rising in my throat, the frantic search, and then the crushing, absolute betrayal when I arrived at the presentation hall to see my designs projected on the screen. With Silas standing in front of them, accepting the praise of the faculty, he had submitted them under his name. When he won the Young Pritzker, a prize that launches careers into the stratosphere. I had tried to scream. I had tried to tell the dean, but Silas was a master architect of reality. He sat me down later that night. I could still hear his voice, smooth as polished concrete, echoing in the silent kitchen. "Juniper, look at you," he had said, his tone dripping with a poisonous sweetness. "You are a mess. You cannot handle the pressure of the spotlight. You are shaking right now. You are brilliant at the grunt work, honey, but you lack the vision to lead. I did this for us. I took the burden so you could be safe." He made me believe that my anonymity was a kindness. He convinced me that I was a support beam, never the spire. For 2 years of marriage, I drew his designs, corrected his structural flaws, and watched him accept the applause while I stood in the shadows. Holding his coat, he told our friends I was fragile. He told our professors I had lost my nerve. He gaslit me until I looked in the mirror and saw only a ghost. I opened my eyes, pulling myself back to the present. My reflection in the glass showed a woman of 32, with dark hair cut in a sharp, severe bob, and eyes that looked older than my years. I was supposed to be free now. I was a freelance consultant for high-end eco-restorations, working under a strict non-disclosure agreement because I was terrified of anyone connecting me to the industry. Darling, Silas Thorne, I had built a safe life, a quiet life, a life where I did not have to compete, where I did not have to prove I existed. I turned away from the window and walked back to the island. My fingers hovered over the card. I should tear it up. I should throw it into the recycling bin and order takeout, and pretend that Sterling University never existed. Going there meant walking into a room where everyone believed I was the crazy ex-wife who cracked under pressure. It meant seeing him. It meant watching him stand on a stage and accept adoration for a career built on the bones of my talent. My heart began to race, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. My palms were sweating. This was the PTSD. It was not just a memory. It was a biological command to flee, run, juniper, hide, stay small, stay safe. The sound of the front door clicking shut snapped me out of my spiraling panic. Heavy footsteps, steady and rhythmic, approached across the hardwood. Elias, my husband of 4 years, the man who owned Vane Industries, a conglomerate worth billions in clean energy tech, yet who refused to have a social media account and drove a 5-year-old sedan because he liked the suspension. He was the antithesis of Silas, where Silas was all shine and no substance. Elias was bedrock. He was the silent hum of power that kept the lights on, not the flash of the bulb that blinded you. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his silk tie. He looked tired. It had been a long day of acquisitions and board meetings, the kind of high-stakes corporate warfare that would make lesser men crumble. But when he saw me, the hardness in his face instantly softened. He didn't look at the view. He looked at my hands, which were gripping the counter so hard my knuckles were white. "You are thinking about burning it," he said. It was not a question. His voice was a low rumble, grounding, like earth. He walked around the island, placing his leather briefcase on the floor. He didn't touch me immediately. He waited until I looked at him. He knew better than to crowd me when I was in this state. "It is an invitation," I said, my voice sounding thin and brittle. "For the reunion." Elias glanced at the card. His dark eyes narrowed slightly as he read the name of the keynote speaker. He knew the history. He knew everything. I had told him the truth on our 3rd date, sobbing into a napkin at a diner, expecting him to run. Instead, he had listened with a terrifyingly calm intensity, and then simply said, "Then we will build something better." "Silas is speaking," I whispered. "He is going to talk about the future of architecture. He is going to stand there and lie, and everyone is going to clap." Elias moved closer then. He placed his large, warm hands over mine, prying them gently from the cold marble. His skin was rough. He was a billionaire who still spent his weekends working in his wood shop, building furniture because he liked the honesty of wood. "And you want to hide," Elias stated. "You want to stay here, in this tower, where he cannot see you." "I am not hiding," I lied, pulling my hands away. I have no interest in the past. It is over. Why reopen the wound?" "Because it never healed. Juniper," Elias said softly. "You just covered it up." He walked over to the wine fridge and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water, pouring a glass for me. He slid it across the counter. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked. I looked down at the floor. A mess. "I see the woman who redesigned the cooling systems for my entire server farm on a napkin," he said. "I see the artist who can look at a crumbling ruin and see a palace. I see my wife. But right now, I also see someone who is letting a ghost haunt her own house." I took a sip of the water, the bubbles stinging my throat. "If I go, he will corner me. He will try to make me feel small. And the worst part, Elias, I am afraid it will work. I am afraid that the moment I see him, I will turn back into that 22-year-old girl who believed she was nothing." Elias walked around the counter and stood directly in front of me. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and imposing. but he made himself gentle for me. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "He can only make you feel small if you agree to be small," he said. "You are not that girl anymore. You have me. You have your own name. You have a talent he could never steal. Only borrow." "He stole 8 years of my confidence," I countered, the bitterness rising like bile. "Then go take it back," Elias said. I looked at him, startled by the firmness in his tone. "What?" "Go to the reunion," he said. "Look him in the eye. Let him see you. Not the broken girl he left behind, but the woman you are. If you stay home, Juniper, you are telling yourself that he still owns you. You are telling yourself that his version of the story is the only one that matters." He paused, his whiskey-colored eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that burned. "Are you going to let him write the ending of your life?" The question hung in the air, heavy and demanding. I looked at the invitation again. Keynote speaker Silas Thorne. I imagined Silas on that stage, smiling that practiced, predatory smile. I imagined him telling stories about his crazy ex-wife to our old classmates. If I stayed home, I remained the ghost he created. If I went, well, I might be destroyed, but at least I would be real. A flicker of something hot ignited in my chest. It was not courage, exactly. It was anger, cold, hard anger. "I have nothing to wear," I said, my voice trembling but distinct. "Everything I own is quiet, safe." Elias smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "Then we will find something loud." "You hate parties," I reminded him. "You hate crowds. You hate people who talk about their net worth." "I do," he agreed. "But I love you, and I hate bullies." He picked up the invitation and held it out to me. "So what is the verdict, Mrs. Vane?" I took the card from him. The paper felt heavy, but no longer crushing. It was just paper. It was just a room. It was just a man. "I will go," I said, the words tasting like ash and iron. "But I am terrified." Elias pulled me into his arms. Burying his face in my hair, I could smell sandalwood and the faint, clean scent of rain. I felt the solid thump of his heart against my chest, a steady rhythm that drowned out the frantic panic of my own. "Good," he whispered against my temple. "Fear means you are awake, and Juniper. When we walk through those doors, you won't be walking alone. He thinks he is the king of that castle. He is about to learn that he is just a tenant, and the landlord has arrived." I closed my eyes and allowed myself, for the first time in 10 years, to imagine not just surviving Silas Thorne, but defeating him. The decision was made. I was going back to Sterling University. I was going back to the scene of the crime. But this time, I wasn't the victim. I was the evidence. The walk-in closet in our master suite was larger than the entire apartment Silas and I had shared in Queens. Yet as I stood amidst the rows of designer silk and cashmere, I felt as though the walls were closing in on me. I reached for the safety of black. It was a long-sleeved, high-necked velvet gown that covered everything. It was a beautiful dress, objectively speaking, but its primary function for me was camouflage. If I wore black, I could stand against a shadow and disappear. If I wore black, I was mourning. If I wore black, I was apologetic. "No," a deep voice said from the doorway. I jumped, my hand freezing on the velvet hanger. Elias was leaning against the doorframe, holding a garment bag with the logo of a French couturier I had only ever read about in magazines before meeting him. "It is elegant," I argued, my voice sounding defensive even to my own ears. "It is appropriate." "It is a hiding place," Elias corrected gently. He walked into the room, the garment bag rustling softly. "You are not going there to hide, Juniper. You are going there to be seen." He unzipped the bag, and the fabric spilled out like liquid sunlight filtering through deep water. It was emerald green, not a polite, muted moss, but a vibrant, arresting jewel tone that demanded attention. The neckline was a daring plunge I would never have chosen for myself. and the back was almost non-existent. I stared at it, and for a split second, the air in the room grew cold. "You look like a country girl trying too hard." Silas's voice echoed in my memory. "Put on the beige one. You know you do not have the skin tone for bright colors. You look cheap." The memory was 8 years old, but the shame was fresh. I remembered that night vividly. It was a gala for the Architectural Digest Awards. I had bought a red dress, feeling bold for the first time in months. Silas had taken one look at me, curled his lip in that distinct way of his, and told me I looked like I was auditioning for a cabaret. I had changed into a shapeless beige sack, and he had patted my head and told me I looked classy. "I can't wear that," I whispered, stepping back. "It is too much," Silas used to say. "Silas," Elias interrupted, his voice firm but devoid of anger, "was afraid of you shining because he knew it would reveal how dull he was. Put it on." I hesitated, looking from the safe black velvet to the dangerous emerald silk. Elias did not push. He simply held the dress out. His eyes filled with a quiet challenge. I took a breath that rattled in my chest and reached for the green silk. When I stepped out of the dressing area 10 minutes later, the silence in the room was absolute. I walked to the full-length mirror, bracing myself for the criticism I had been conditioned to expect. But the woman staring back at me was not the mousy, frightened girl from the past. The emerald fabric hugged my waist and flowed to the floor, creating a silhouette of strength and grace. My skin looked luminous against the deep green. I looked like a statue carved from jade. I looked powerful. Elias moved behind me, his eyes meeting mine in the reflection. He did not smile. This was not a moment for casual happiness. It was a moment of recognition. "Perfect," he murmured. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside lay a necklace unlike anything I had ever seen. It was not a glittering, multifaceted solitaire. It was a rough, uncut diamond, suspended on a delicate platinum chain. The stone was large, heavy, and raw. It looked ancient and indestructible. "Turn around," he instructed. I lifted my hair, exposing the nape of my neck. His fingers brushed my skin, warm and calloused, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. He fastened the clasp, and the weight of the stone settled against my throat. "Why this one?" I asked, touching the rough surface of the gem. "It isn't polished." "That is the point," Elias said, turning me to face him. He took my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones. Silas wanted a rhinestone, juniper, something flashy and cheap that he could show off and put in a box when he was done. "This stone is real. It has not been cut to fit a mold. It is valuable because of what it is, not because of how much it sparkles for an audience. It is tough. It is enduring. It is you." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. "I am terrified," I confessed, the words tumbling out. "I look in the mirror and I see this dress, and this jewelry, and I know I look the part. But inside, I am still the girl who let him steal her life. Everyone at that reunion thinks I am a failure. They think I quit because I was too weak. What if they are right?" "They are only right if you let them be," Elias said. "You built a life from the ashes he left behind. You run your own business. You command respect in rooms where Silas Thorne would not even be allowed to serve coffee. You are not a fraud." Just then, the phone in his pocket vibrated. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the quiet intimacy of the room. Elias pulled it out, and I saw his jaw tighten. The softness in his eyes vanished, replaced by the steeliness of the CEO of Vane Industries. "Damn it," he muttered. "What is it?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. He looked at me, frustration etched into the lines of his forehead. "It is the board. The merger with the Japanese firm is stalling. They are calling an emergency vote in 30 minutes. I have to take this call, and I have to be on the video link." Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. "You are not coming." "I have to go to the office," he said, gripping my shoulders. "I will be there as soon as I can. It will take an hour." Maybe 90 minutes. An hour? I repeated, my voice rising an octave. You want me to walk in there alone, Elias? I can't. The plan was for us to walk in together. The plan was for you to be the shield. Plans change, he said, his voice urgent but steady. I know this is not what we wanted, but I cannot let this deal collapse. It involves 3,000 jobs. He was right. I knew he was right. Elias was a good man, a responsible leader, and he carried the weight of thousands of families on his shoulders. He could not just abandon them because his wife was afraid of her ex-husband, but the realization that I would have to face the initial onslaught alone made my knees weak. I can't do it, I whispered. I will wait for you. If you wait, Elias said, forcing me to look at him. You are hiding again. If you wait, you are proving Silas right. You need to walk through those doors with your head held high, not clinging to my arm like a frightened child. You need to own that space before I even get there. It was a test, a terrible, terrifying test. But as I looked into his whiskey-colored eyes, I saw that he believed I could pass it. He believed in me more than I believed in myself. 1 hour, I asked. 1 hour, he promised. I will be there before the keynote speech. I will be there to see you triumph. But the first step you have to take, that one yourself. He kissed me then, hard and desperate, a transfer of strength. Then he was gone, striding out of the room to fight his own battles, leaving me alone in the silence of the penthouse. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of a black town car, watching the city of New York blur past the tinted windows. The leather seat was cool beneath my legs. I clutched my small clutch bag so tightly my fingers cramped. The driver, a stoic man named Arthur, who had been with Elias for years, caught my eye in the rearview mirror. We will be at the Obsidian in 10 minutes. Mrs. Vane, he said. Thank you. Arthur, I replied, though I wished he had said 10 years. My phone buzzed in my lap. I picked it up, expecting a message from Elias. It was a number I did not have saved. But the context made the sender immediately clear. It was likely from Chloe, a mutual friend from college who had drifted away after the divorce, choosing the side of the rising star architect over the unstable wife. Saw the guest list. He is waiting for you. Maybe it is better if you just skip it. For your own sake. The text was meant to sound concerned, but I tasted the malice in it. It was a warning shot. Silas knew I was coming. He was preparing the stage. He probably had a script ready, a collection of pitiful anecdotes about me to entertain his court. For your own sake. The phrase was a classic manipulation tactic, disguising cruelty as benevolence. I typed out a reply, my fingers flying over the screen. I will be there in 5. Then I deleted it. I would not give them the satisfaction of a response. My presence would be the response. The car slowed as we turned onto the avenue leading to the Obsidian. The hotel was a monolith of black glass and steel, imposing and cold. A red carpet had been rolled out under the awning, flanked by velvet ropes. Photographers were already there, their flashbulbs popping like miniature lightning storms. This was not just a reunion, it was a media event. Silas had turned a simple alumni gathering into a celebration of his own ego. Arthur pulled the car up to the curb. The door handle looked miles away. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. This was it, the lion's den. You are nothing, the voice of the past whispered in my ear. You are a fraud in a fancy dress. I looked down at the rough diamond resting against my chest. I felt its jagged edges. It was real. It was hard. It did not apologize for existing. I closed my eyes for 1 second and summoned the image of Elias. I thought of his unwavering belief, the way he looked at me not as a broken thing to be fixed, but as a masterpiece to be admired. I thought of the stolen designs, the years of labor, the nights I cried myself to sleep while Silas snored beside me. The anger returned, hotter this time. It burned away the fear, leaving behind a cold, crystal clarity. I was done being the victim. I was done being the poor juniper of their stories. Mrs. Vane, Arthur asked. Having opened the door for me, he offered me his hand. I looked at his hand, then up at the blinding lights of the paparazzi and the looming entrance of the hotel. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I smoothed the emerald silk over my thighs. I lifted my chin until my neck formed a straight, proud line. "I am ready," I said, though I was speaking to myself more than to him. I took his hand and stepped out onto the pavement. The humid night air hit me, followed instantly by the blinding assault of camera flashes. "Who is that?" I heard a photographer shout. "Is that a model? Look at that dress." I did not flinch. I did not shield my eyes. I walked toward the entrance with a stride that ate up the ground. I was not Juniper Hollis, the washed-up architect. I was not the ex-wife of Silas Thorne. I am Juniper Vane. I repeated in my mind, the words forming a rhythm with the click of my heels against the pavement. And I am not his shadow anymore. I am the eclipse. I handed my invitation to the doorman, who looked at me with wide, appreciative eyes, and stepped into the lobby. The air conditioning was freezing, but the fire inside me was burning hot enough to melt steel. The game had begun, and for the first time in my life, I was not playing by Silas's rules. I was playing by mine. The Obsidian Grand Ballroom was a masterclass in architectural arrogance. It was a cavernous space dominated by black marble and sharp, aggressive angles that seemed designed to slice the very air into ribbons. The lighting was not ambient. It was an interrogation, a series of harsh, recessed beams that illuminated every pore, every flaw, and every drop of sweat on the faces of the guests. It was a room built for display, not for comfort, which made it the perfect habitat for the sharks swimming through it tonight. I stepped through the double doors and felt the physical weight of the atmosphere hit me like a wall of water. The air smelled of expensive scotch, heavy florals, and the metallic tang of desperate ambition. This was the ecosystem of the elite architecture world, a place where people judged you not by the content of your character, but by the pedigree of your shoes and the prestige of your last commission. For a heartbeat. No one noticed me. The noise was a deafening roar of overlapping conversations, the clinking of crystal, and the high-pitched, performative laughter that people use when they are trying to impress someone richer than themselves. I stood near the entrance, clutching my clutch bag like a shield, my knuckles white against the emerald silk of my dress. Then, the ripples began. It started with a woman in a silver lame dress near the bar. She turned, her eyes scanning the room for someone more important to talk to, and her gaze landed on me. Her glass halted halfway to her mouth. She nudged the man beside her, a portly contractor I vaguely recognized as someone who had cut corners on the foundations of the Riverside project. He turned, squinted, and then his eyebrows shot up toward his receding hairline. The silence did not happen all at once. It spread like a virus, jumping from cluster to cluster. Heads turned, whispers ignited like dry grass in a drought. "Is that? It cannot be. I thought she was in a facility upstate. That is Juniper Thorne, or whatever she calls herself now." I forced my chin up, channeling the cold, hard strength of the diamond resting against my collarbone. I walked into the room. I did not scurry. I did not hug the walls. I cut a straight line through the crowd toward the center of the room, my heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic staccato on the polished floor. The crowd parted for me, not out of respect, but out of a morbid curiosity. The way people slow down on the highway to stare at a car wreck. "She looks stable," a woman whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Give it an hour," a man replied with a snicker. Silas said she crumbles if the lighting is too harsh. The injustice of it burned in my throat like acid. Stable, I was the one who had managed the logistics for 3 firms while Silas played golf. I was the one who had kept the books, drawn the plans, and smoothed over the client relationships he destroyed with his arrogance. But history is written by the victors. And for the last 8 years, Silas had held the pen. I was looking for a waiter, for a drink, for anything to occupy my hands, when a figure detached itself from a group of sycophants and glided toward me. It was Clara. We had been study partners in our 2nd year. We had shared coffees and complaints about the workload. But the moment Silas began his ascent, Clara had attached herself to him like a remora to a shark. She was now his director of communications, a title that essentially meant she was the gatekeeper of his lies. "Juniper," she cried out, her voice pitched to a level of theatrical surprise that set my teeth on edge. She rushed forward, arms open, aiming for a hug I had no intention of returning. I stiffened, and she awkwardly patted my arms instead, pulling back to survey me with eyes that were cold and calculating. "Oh my goodness, look at you. You look so, well." The emphasis on the word well was a masterstroke of passive aggression. It implied that being well was a surprising achievement for someone like me. "Hello, Clara," I said, my voice steady. "You look busy." "Oh, always, always," she sighed, waving a manicured hand as if shooing away the burdens of her importance. "Silas is just swamped. The press, the investors. You know how he is. He is a magnet." She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant to be overheard by everyone within a 10-foot radius. "But honestly, we were all so shocked to see your name on the list. Are you sure you are up for this? It is a lot of stimulation. We would hate for you to have an episode." There it was, the narrative, the episode. I remembered the night she was referring to. It was 2 weeks before I left him. I had been awake for 48 hours straight, finishing the renderings for the Apex Tower because Silas had forgotten the deadline. I had collapsed from exhaustion in the lobby of our building. Silas had told everyone I was having a mental break brought on by my inability to cope with the industry. He played the grieving, worried husband, while I was sedated in a hospital bed, sleeping for the first time in months. "I am not fragile, Clara," I said, locking eyes with her. "And I do not have episodes. I have deadlines." Clara blinked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she plastered it back on. "Of course, but, dear, we all have our little hobbies to keep us busy. I heard you are doing some freelance work. Renovating kitchens. That is so sweet. Good for you for keeping your hand in the game, even if it is just at a hobbyist level." She was trying to diminish me, to shrink me down until I fit into the box they had built for me. Renovating kitchens, I had just finished designing the heat exchange system for a data center in Iceland that used geothermal vents to run at zero carbon emissions. But I could not say that, not yet. "It pays the bills," I said simply. "Well, if you ever need a recommendation," Clara cooed, patting my arm again. "Silas is very generous, he always says. Poor Juniper. I just want her to be okay. He really is a saint, you know, after everything you put him through." The urge to slap her was so strong my fingers twitched. She believed it. That was the most terrifying part. She genuinely believed that Silas was the victim of a hysterical, incompetent wife. He had brainwashed them all. "Enjoy the party, Clara," I said, stepping around her. "I think I see someone I need to avoid." I walked away before she could fire another poisoned dart. My heart was hammering against my ribs. But not from fear anymore. It was rage, a cold, clarifying rage. I tried to find a corner, a pillar, a shadow, anything to offer a moment of respite, but the architect of the obsidian had clearly hated introverts. The room was an open panopticon. There were no alcoves, no private booths. Every square inch was visible, exposed, designed to facilitate the maximum amount of judgment. I ended up near a towering ice sculpture of a skyscraper, a ridiculous, melting phallus that dripped water onto the black tablecloth. I stood there, trying to regulate my breathing, when a shadow fell over me. Long time no see. June. I turned to see Marcus and Trent, 2 men who had been in the year above us. They were both wearing suits that cost more than my first car, and they both held tumblers of whiskey with a looseness that suggested it was not their first drink of the night. "It is Juniper," I corrected, my tone icy. Right," Marcus laughed, leaning against the table with a lecherous tilt of his hips. "Juniper, the runaway bride, man, Silas was a wreck when you left, crying on my shoulder about how he tried everything to save you. He is a good guy, Trent added, eyeing the plunging neckline of my emerald dress with a gaze that felt like a physical violation. You know, not many guys would put up with a wife who, loses the plot. But hey, you look like you pulled yourself together. That dress killer. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of bourbon and expensive cologne was suffocating. June, I have always had a thing for the crazy ones. They are more fun, right? More intense. He reached out, his hand aiming for my waist. If you are lonely tonight, seeing Silas up there with his new model wife, I could keep you company. We could go up to my room, order some room service, talk about old times. I froze. It was not the proposition that stunned me. It was the casual cruelty of it. To them, I was damaged goods. I was a discard pile. Since Silas had labeled me as broken, they assumed I had no value, no dignity, and no standards. They thought they were doing me a favor by offering me their scraps. I looked at Trent's hand, hovering inches from my silk dress. Run. The old juniper screamed in my head. Run back to the penthouse. Lock the door. Hide. But then, I saw Elias. Not literally, but I felt him. I felt the weight of the rough diamond on my chest. The landlord has arrived, he had said. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I looked Trent dead in the eye. Touch me, I said, my voice low and lethal. And you will lose that hand. Trent blinked, startled by the venom in my tone. He pulled his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. Whoa, he chuckled nervously, raising his hands in mock surrender. Easy, Tiger. I was just being nice. No need to get hysterical. See, Silas was right. You are a wire waiting to trip. Walk away. Trent, I commanded. Now, he sneered, his ego bruised. Whatever. You are not that hot anyway. They sauntered off, muttering about psycho bitches to each other. But they left. I let out a breath I had been holding for 10 minutes. My legs were trembling, a fine tremor that ran from my calves to my hips. I was fighting a war on a dozen fronts, armed only with a dress and a diamond. I signaled a passing waiter and took a glass of sparkling water. The cold condensation on the glass grounded me. I took a sip, letting the bubbles scour the taste of their insults from my mouth. I looked around the room. I saw the sneers. I saw the pity masked as curiosity. I saw the judgment in every eye. They were waiting for me to crack. They were waiting for the episode that would confirm all of Silas's stories. They wanted a show. I straightened my spine until it hurt. I smoothed the emerald silk over my hips. I will not give you a show, I thought, staring at the empty stage where a microphone stood waiting. I will give you a reckoning. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The murmuring of the crowd died down. Replaced by a hush of anticipation, a spotlight swept across the room, searching. Before landing on the velvet curtains at the far end of the stage, the music swelled a triumphant, orchestral piece that sounded like the soundtrack to a coronation. My stomach twisted into a knot, but I forced my feet to remain planted on the floor. I was a statue. I was a mountain. I was Mrs. Elias Vane. The curtains parted. I waited for the monster to walk out. The doors swung open, and the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted instantly from a chaotic hum to a reverent, gravitational pull toward the entrance. If I had walked in like a curiosity, Silas Thorne walked in like a coronation. He was surrounded by a phalanx of people investors in Italian suits. Journalists with recording devices held aloft like offerings, and the sycophants who fed on his scraps. In the center of it all, Silas moved with the easy, languid grace of a man who believes the earth rotates solely to warm his face. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him with architectural precision, the midnight blue fabric emphasizing the width of his shoulders and the trimness of his waist. His hair was perfectly coiffed. His smile was blinding, and from a distance, he looked like the very definition of the American dream. But I was not standing at a distance. I was standing in the blast zone of his ego. and I knew what lay beneath the polish. I saw the tightness at the corners of his eyes, a tension that whispered of debt and desperation. I saw the way his gaze darted around the room. Not to connect with people, but to assess their utility. He was not greeting friends. He was counting poker chips. I took a step back, intending to fade behind the ice sculpture, but it was too late. His eyes, the pale, chilly blue of a winter sky, swept over the crowd and locked onto me with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. For a second, his smile faltered. It was a microscopic glitch in the matrix, a flicker of genuine shock that I had actually dared to show my face. But Silas was a master of improvisation. He did not look away. He did not pretend not to see the crazy ex-wife standing in her emerald war paint. Instead, his eyes narrowed, and the shock transmuted instantly into something darker, something predatory. He excused himself from a reporter from the Architectural Review and began to cut a path straight toward me. The crowd parted for him, heads turning to watch the collision. I could practically hear the synapses firing in their collective brains, anticipating the drama, the king and the madwoman. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. But I forced my feet to root themselves into the floor. I am the landlord. I reminded myself. He is just a tenant. Silas stopped 2 feet in front of me, up close. The smell of him hit me, a mix of expensive leather, tobacco, and that cloying, heavy musk he had worn for a decade. It was the scent of my nightmares, the olfactory trigger for 1,000 panic attacks. But tonight, beneath the cologne, I smelled something else. I smelled sweat. I smelled fear. He looked me up and down, his gaze traveling over the emerald dress with a mixture of appreciation and contempt. He was assessing the fabric, the cut, the cost, trying to reconcile the woman standing before him with the broken creature he had discarded. "Juniper," he said, his voice smooth as oil, pitched perfectly to be heard by the circle of onlookers pretending not to listen. "I did not think you had the guts to come here. You look healthier than I expected." The insult was wrapped in a compliment, a classic Silas tactic. By saying I looked healthier, he was reminding everyone that I had once been unwell. He was reinforcing the narrative of my instability without explicitly stating it. "I am surprisingly resilient, Silas," I replied, my voice calm, though my hands were trembling slightly at my sides. "It is amazing what fresh air and freedom can do for a person's constitution." His jaw tightened. He had expected me to stammer. He had expected me to look at the floor. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, using his height to loom over me. "And who paid for the dress?" he asked, his voice dropping to a murmur that only I could hear. "Did you find some poor sap to pity you, or did you blow your disability check on a rental?" "I bought it myself," I said, meeting his gaze. "Sure you did," he sneered, a flash of the real Silas breaking through the mask. He turned slightly, reaching back to pull a young woman from the shadows of his entourage. "I do not think you have met my wife, Juniper. This is Bella." My breath caught in my throat. Bella was stunning, tall and willow-thin, with cascading blonde hair and features that could have graced the cover of Vogue. But it was not her beauty that struck me. It was her eyes. They were wide, glassy, and utterly vacant. She stood with her shoulders hunched forward, her hands clasping her elbows in a defensive posture I knew intimately. She looked at Silas with a mixture of adoration and terrified obedience. She was 24, maybe 25, the same age I was when Silas started stealing my work. "Hello, Juniper," Bella whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked at me as if I were a cautionary tale come to life. "Hello, Bella," I said, and despite everything, I felt a wave of profound sadness wash over me. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to tell her to run. I wanted to tell her that the man holding her arm was a vampire who would drain her of every drop of color until she was as gray and empty as I had once been. Silas wrapped an arm around Bella's waist, pulling her tight against his side. It looked like a hug, but I saw the way his fingers dug into her ribcage. It was a warning. Stand here. Look pretty. Do not speak unless spoken to." Then, he released Bella and turned his attention back to me. He reached out and placed his hand on my bare shoulder. My skin crawled. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to recoil, not to slap his hand away, not to scream. His palm was damp and heavy. His thumb traced the line of my collarbone in a gesture that was intimately possessive. He was marking his territory. He was telling the room, "I owned this. I broke this. I can touch it whenever I want." I forced myself to stand like a stone. If I flinch, he wins. He leaned in close, his lips brushing my ear. To the onlookers, it looked like a friendly, perhaps even tender, greeting between ex-spouses, but his words were venom. "Listen to me closely. June," he hissed, the charming facade completely gone. "I do not know what game you are playing, showing up here dressed like a high-end escort, but you need to tread carefully. Tonight is the most important night of my career." He squeezed my shoulder hard enough to bruise. "I am closing a deal tonight that will put me in the history books," he continued, his voice thick with arrogance. "I have investors here from Vane Industries. Do you understand what that means? That is the big leagues. That is billions of dollars. I am this close to signing a partnership for the Green Tower project." My heart stopped, then restarted with a violent thud. Vane Industries. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh out loud. Silas was threatening me with my own husband's company. He was bragging about closing a deal with a man who was currently speeding across the city to come and destroy him. He was trying to intimidate me with the very power that I slept next to every night. He had no idea. He thought he was the shark in the tank, unaware that he was swimming next to the Leviathan's wife. "Vane Industries," I repeated, keeping my face perfectly neutral. "That is ambitious of you. Silas, it is not ambition, it is a done deal," he snapped. "So do not do anything stupid. Do not cause a scene. Do not have one of your little crying fits. If your pathetic presence messes up this contract, I will make sure you never work in this town again. I will bury you so deep, not even your therapist will be able to find you." He pulled back, searching my face for the fear he thrived on. He wanted to see my lip quiver. He wanted to see the tears well up. He wanted the satisfaction of knowing he still held the remote control to my emotions. But the fear did not come. Instead, a strange, cold calm settled over me. It was the calm of someone who knows the end of the movie while the villain is still monologuing. I reached up and deliberately, slowly, removed his hand from my shoulder. I held his wrist for a second, just long enough to feel his pulse jumping, and then dropped it as if it were something soiled. "I am just here for the party. Silas," I said, my voice bored. "I have no interest in your deals, your investors, or your threats. Do not flatter yourself. You are not the center of my universe anymore. You are barely a footnote." The silence that followed was absolute. Silas stared at me, his mouth opening slightly and then snapping shut. His face went through a kaleidoscope of micro-expressions: shock, confusion, and finally, a deep, dark crimson rage. He had never been spoken to like that. Not by anyone, and certainly not by me. I was the clay, not the sculptor. I was the echo, not the voice. "A footnote," he repeated, the words sounding strangled. "Enjoy your speech," I said, turning my back on him to signal the conversation was over. "Try not to bore us." I sensed the shift in the air immediately. The people standing nearby, who had been pretending to inspect their manicures, exchanged wide-eyed glances. I had just publicly dismissed Silas Thorne. I had treated the king of the reunion like a nuisance. I heard a sharp intake of breath behind me. Silas was vibrating. I could feel the heat of his anger radiating off him like a furnace. He was a narcissist. Indifference was not just an insult to him, it was an existential threat. If I was not afraid of him, if I did not worship him, then his power over me was an illusion, and Silas Thorne could not tolerate illusions unless he was the one casting them. "You think you are clever," he snarled to my back, loud enough for the circle of observers to hear. You think because you put on a fancy dress you are someone new, you are still the same empty shell I left in that apartment. Juniper, you are nothing without me. I kept walking toward the bar, refusing to turn around. Do not walk away from me, he barked, losing his composure entirely. I stopped and looked over my shoulder. I raised one eyebrow. Or what? Silas, you will steal my drink like you stole my thesis. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a quiet sound, like the air being sucked out of a vacuum, but it was unmistakable. I had said the quiet part out loud. I had dropped the match. Silas stood frozen, his face turning a mottled shade of purple. He looked at the shocked faces around him, the investors, the journalists, his peers. He saw the doubt flickering in their eyes. He saw the crack in his perfect facade. He needed to fix this. He needed to regain control. And in the twisted logic of a man like Silas, there was only one way to do that. He had to destroy the source of the dissent. He had to humiliate me so thoroughly that no one would ever believe a word I said. He had to turn me into a joke. He smoothed his jacket, forcing a terrifyingly synthetic smile onto his face. He turned to his entourage, his voice booming with forced conviviality. She is having a moment, he announced, gesturing toward me with a pitying shake of his head. The medication must be off. Poor thing. It is tragic. Really, to see someone so detached from reality. He looked at me one last time, his eyes dead and cold. We should get started, he told the room. I think it is time for a toast. I have some stories to share. I think everyone needs to hear the truth about where we all came from. He marched toward the stage, his steps heavy with purpose. He signaled the AV technician. He grabbed the microphone stand as if it were a weapon. I stood by the bar, my hand gripping the cold glass of water until my knuckles turned white. The first skirmish was over, and I had drawn blood. But now, he was bringing out the heavy artillery. He was going to use the microphone to rewrite history in real time. I checked my watch. 40 minutes. Elias was 40 minutes away. I was alone in the hangman's waiting room, and the executioner was clearing his throat. The war for my reputation did not happen with a shout or a scream. It happened in the quiet, clinking spaces between champagne flutes. It happened in the hushed tones of faux intimacy that Silas Thorne had mastered like a second language. After our confrontation, Silas did not immediately ascend the stage. He was too smart for that. He knew that a speech requires a receptive audience, and the little scene I had caused the refusal to be intimidated. The public dismissal had created a ripple of dissonance in his carefully curated reality. He needed to smooth the waters. He needed to inoculate the herd against the truth before he delivered the killing blow. I stood by the bar, gripping my water glass, and watched him work. It was a masterclass in social engineering. He moved from table to table, a shark in a tuxedo, trailing his entourage like pilot fish. He did not look angry anymore. That was the terrifying part. He looked sad. He looked resigned. He looked like a man carrying a heavy, tragic burden, and that burden was me. I watched him stop at the table of Professor Vance, the Emeritus Dean of Architecture. Vance was a man I had once idolized, a man who had told me in my junior year that my understanding of spatial dynamics was prodigious. Now, Vance looked at Silas with rapt attention. Silas leaned in, placing a hand on the old man's shoulder, his head bowed in a posture of humility. He gestured vaguely in my direction, then touched his own chest, shaking his head. I could not hear the words, but I could read the body language as if it were a blueprint. I tried. Professor, I tried so hard to help her, but she just broke. Vance turned his head and looked at me. His eyes, once filled with mentorship, were now clouded with a heavy, judgmental pity. He sighed and patted Silas's hand. The verdict had been delivered, and the jury had not even let me speak. Silas moved on. He spoke to the partners from the firm where I had interned. He spoke to the alumni donors. He was planting seeds of poison in every ear, watering them with his charisma. He is telling them you left him because you could not handle the lean years, a voice said near my ear. I stiffened. But it was just a passing waiter offering me a napkin. I took it, my hands shaking. The irony was suffocating. The lean years, I was the one who worked 3 jobs, barista, tutor, and freelance drafter to pay our rent, while Silas refused to take any work that he felt was beneath his artistic vision. I bought his suits. I paid for his portfolio printing. I fed him. And now, he was rewriting history to make me the gold digger who abandoned the starving artist. I took a sip of water, trying to swallow the lump of injustice in my throat. When I was flanked, it was a pincer movement. 3 women from our graduating class surrounded me. I remembered them: Sarah, Emily, and Jessica. They had been the it girls of the studio, talented but more interested in the social hierarchy of the department than the work itself. They were now dressed in identical shades of pastel, looking at me with eyes that gleamed with malicious curiosity. "Juniper," Sarah began, her voice pitched high and sweet, like a lullaby in a horror movie. "We were just saying, it is so brave of you to show up, really. Most people in your position would just stay in their lane." "My lane?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "You know," Emily chimed in. Stepping closer, she held a glass of Chardonnay that looked dangerously full. "The quiet life. We heard about your new husband. Silas mentioned him." My stomach dropped. "What did Silas say?" Jessica giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Oh, come on. June, you do not have to be shy with us. We are all adults here. He told us you married. Well, comfortably, very comfortably." "He is a billionaire," Sarah whispered, leaning in as if sharing a dirty secret. "But honestly, isn't it a bit weird? I mean, Silas said he is in his late 70s. Does he even know where he is half the time?" I stared at them, the blood draining from my face. 70s. Elias was 38. He was in the prime of his life. He ran marathons. He boxed on weekends. "He is not 70, I said, my voice tight. "He is 38. The 3 women exchanged glances that clearly said, "She is lying." "Right, sure," Jessica said, her tone dripping with condescension. 38? Of course he is. Look, no judgment here. Honey, we get it. Architecture is hard. It eats people alive. Not everyone has the stamina for it. If you found a nice, wealthy grandfather figure to take care of you, that is a valid life choice. Just don't pretend it is a love match. Okay, it is a little insulting to those of us who actually work for a living. "I do work," I snapped, my control fraying. "I have my own consultancy." "Consulting on what?" Emily smirked. "Which shade of beige to paint the nursing home walls?" They laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound that cut through the ambient noise of the party. They did not want the truth. They wanted the caricature Silas had drawn for them. To them, I was the failed student who had sold her youth to a geriatric wallet because she was too weak to succeed on her own. It validated their own struggles. It made them feel superior. "You are pathetic," I said, the words trembling on my lips. "We are not the ones wearing a dress that costs more than a year's tuition to impress a room full of people who know the truth," Sarah countered, her smile vanishing. "Silas told us everything. Juniper, how you had a breakdown, how you begged him to take you back even after you married the old guy. Just stop. You are embarrassing yourself." They turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my own dignity. I felt stripped bare. Every eye in the room felt like a physical touch, slimy and invasive. I looked across the room and saw him. Silas was standing near the stage, holding court. He was not looking at the people around him. He was looking directly at me. He raised his champagne glass in a subtle, mocking toast. His lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. "I told you." His expression said, "I own this room. I own your story." The air in the ballroom suddenly felt too thin to breathe. The walls, with their sharp, aggressive angles, seemed to be leaning in, ready to crush me. The smell of perfume and roasted meat became nauseating. I needed to get out. I needed silence. I turned and walked as fast as my dignity would allow toward the double doors marked restrooms. I pushed through them and stumbled into the ladies' lounge. It was an oasis of white marble and gold fixtures, silent and freezing cold. I gripped the edge of the sink, staring at my reflection. My face was pale, my eyes wide and dark with panic. The emerald dress, which had felt like armor an hour ago, now felt like a costume. They believe him, I thought, despair clawing at my chest. It does not matter what I say. It does not matter what I do. His voice is louder. I reached for a paper towel to dab the sweat from my upper lip, and that was when I heard it. A sound coming from the last stall. It was a soft, muffled sound, like a wounded animal trying to stay quiet. It was the sound of someone crying into their hands. I froze. I should leave. I should give whoever it was their privacy. But then, a voice drifted out, broken by sobs. I am sorry. I am sorry. Silas. I didn't mean to. My heart stopped. I walked slowly toward the stall. Bella. The crying stopped abruptly. There was a rustle of fabric, a sniffle, and then the lock clicked. The door swung open. Bella stood there, looking nothing like the polished trophy wife from the ballroom. Her mascara was running in black streaks down her cheeks. Her nose was red. She was clutching her phone like a lifeline. But what made my blood run cold was the way she flinched when she saw me. She took a step back, hitting the tiled wall. Please, she whispered, her voice shaking. Please do not tell him you saw me crying. He said if I embarrassed him tonight, he would cancel my cards. He said I looked stupid when I tried to talk to the investors. He said I should just be a statue. I stood there, paralyzed by a sense of déjà vu so strong it made me dizzy. The words, they were the exact same words. You look stupid when you try to talk about business. Juniper. Just stand there and look pretty. Be a statue. 10 years. 10 years had passed, and he had not changed a single comma in his script. He was doing the exact same thing to this girl that he had done to me. He was breaking her down, piece by piece, isolating her, making her feel small so he could feel big. I looked at Bella Young, terrified. Trapped in a marriage she probably thought was a fairy tale until the clock struck midnight and the fear that had been strangling me evaporated. It was replaced by something else, something hot, volatile, and incredibly dangerous. It was rage, not the petty anger of an ex-wife, but the righteous fury of a survivor witnessing a crime in progress. He was not just hurting me, he was hurting her. He was a predator who moved from host to host, feeding on their light until they were husk. He told you that you were nothing without him, didn't he? I asked, my voice low and steady. Bella looked up, her eyes wide. She nodded, a single jerky motion. He said I was lucky he picked me up out of the gutter. He is lying, I said. I stepped forward and reached into my purse. I pulled out a handkerchief, a real one, embroidered with my initials, something Elias had given me, and handed it to her. Wipe your face, Bella. She took it, her hands trembling. I can't go back out there. Everyone is looking at me. They all know I'm stupid. You are not stupid, I said fiercely. You are being hunted. There is a difference. I waited while she dabbed at her eyes. I watched her try to reassemble the shattered pieces of her composure. I saw myself in her. I saw the girl I used to be, the girl who would have hidden in this bathroom until the party was over, waiting for permission to exist. But I was not that girl anymore. Listen to me, I said. You stay in here as long as you need, but I'm going back out there. Why? Bella asked, sniffing. He is going to destroy you. He told me he is going to make sure you never show your face in New York again. I turned to the mirror. I checked my reflection. The panic was gone. My eyes were hard, bright, and focused. I reapplied my lipstick, a dark, blood-red shade. It looked like war paint. He thinks he is going to destroy me, I told Bella's reflection in the glass. But he forgot one thing. Buildings crumble when the foundation is rotten. and I am the one who knows where all the cracks are. I turned back to her. Fix your face, Bella, and when you are ready, come out and watch. You might learn something about how to deal with a bully. I turned on my heel and marched out of the restroom. The hallway leading back to the ballroom felt different this time. It wasn't a walk to the gallows. It was a march to the front lines. The chatter of the party grew louder as I approached the doors. I could hear the clinking of glasses, the murmur of lies being exchanged. Silas was out there, thinking he had won. He thought I was cowering in a corner. He thought he had successfully isolated me, shamed me, and silenced me. I pushed the double doors open with both hands. The noise of the party washed over me, but I didn't flinch. I scanned the room and found him immediately. He was laughing at something a donor was saying, his head thrown back, his throat exposed. Laugh while you can. Silas, I thought, stepping onto the plush carpet. The show is just beginning. The sharp, high-pitched ring of a silver spoon striking a crystal champagne flute cut through the ambient chatter of the ballroom. It was a sound that demanded obedience, a sonic gavel calling the court of public opinion to order. I stood near the periphery of the room, my back rigid against the velvet-covered wall. I watched as the crowd turned in unison, their faces like sunflowers rotating toward the sun. But the sun in this solar system was Silas Thorne. He stood on the raised dais at the front of the room, bathed in a single, dramatic beam of white light. He held the microphone with a casual familiarity, his other hand resting in the pocket of his tuxedo trousers. He looked every inch the titan of industry, the tortured genius, the benevolent king holding court. "Thank you," Silas said, his voice booming through the high-quality speakers. It was rich, deep, and laced with a practiced humility that made my stomach turn. "Thank you all for being here. 10 years. It is hard to believe that a decade has passed since we walked the halls of Sterling University, dreaming of building castles in the sky." A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the room. Silas smiled, a boyish, self-deprecating expression that I knew he had practiced in the mirror for hours. "We were young then," he continued, his tone shifting to one of philosophical reflection. "We were hungry. We thought architecture was just about steel and glass, about angles and load-bearing walls. We did not know then that true architecture is about soul. It is about taking the chaos of the human experience and giving it a home." He signaled to the technician in the shadows. The massive screen behind him, which had been displaying the university logo, flickered and changed. A high-definition image filled the wall. A collective gasp of admiration went up from the audience. It was the Azure Library. It was a stunning structure, a spiraling helix of blue glass and white concrete that seemed to defy gravity, twisting upward like a strand of DNA reaching for the clouds. It was the project that had landed Silas on the cover of Modern Design magazine 3 years ago. I stared at the screen, and I did not see a building. I saw a rainy Tuesday in November. I saw the kitchen table of our cramped apartment covered in crumpled sketches. I saw myself, feverish with the flu, wrapped in a blanket, sketching that helix until my fingers cramped because Silas was panicking about a deadline he had forgotten. I remembered explaining the structural integrity of the spiral to him while he nodded vacantly, more interested in checking his phone. "When I designed the Azure Library," Silas said, turning to look at the image with a look of reverence, "I was in a dark place. I was searching for a way to represent the ascent of knowledge, the way wisdom lifts us out of the darkness. It came to me in a dream. A vision of blue light spiraling into the ether. A lie, a bold-faced, poetic lie. It came to him because I handed it to him." "But vision," Silas said, turning back to the crowd, his face growing somber, "is a heavy burden to build something that lasts. You have to be willing to sacrifice. You have to be willing to bleed for your art. And sometimes, you have to be willing to leave people behind." The room went dead silent. This was the pivot. He was moving from the professional to the personal. He was about to strip mine our marriage for sympathy points. "We do not talk enough about the cost of success," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that drew everyone in. We talk about the awards. We talk about the contracts. But we do not talk about the loneliness. We do not talk about what it is like to come home after 18 hours of work, exhausted, hoping for a partner who understands the fire that burns inside you, only to find indifference. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Indifference. I was the one who proofread his emails. I was the one who ironed his shirts. I was the one who stayed up waiting with a hot meal that grew cold while he was out networking at bars with his admirers. I was married once, Silas said, looking down at his shoes as if the memory was too painful to bear. Most of you know that. I loved her. I truly did. She was a sweet girl. But she did not understand this world. She did not understand that to be great, you have to be relentless. He began to pace the stage slowly, like a preacher delivering a sermon on sin. I tried to carry her, he said. God knows I tried. I wanted us to climb the mountain together. But some people are not built for the climb. Some people just want to sit in the valley and look at the flowers. And when you try to pull them up, they do not climb. They just drag you down. He paused for effect, letting the metaphor sink in. The crowd was captivated. They were nodding sympathetically. They saw him as the tragic hero, the Atlas trying to hold up the world while his weak wife clung to his ankles. It broke my heart, Silas continued, his voice thick with emotion. It broke my heart to realize that the person I loved was more interested in the comfort of the present than the glory of the future. She wanted safety. She wanted easy hours. She wanted to talk about reality TV and shopping, while I wanted to talk about changing the skyline of New York. I felt the blood rushing to my face. Shopping. I had not bought a new piece of clothing in 3 years of our marriage, because every cent of our disposable income went into his car lease and his club memberships. He was projecting his own shallowness onto me, painting me as a vapid consumer to hide the fact that he was a parasite. And eventually, he said, stopping center stage and looking out over the audience with a gaze that was both accusing and forgiving. She left. The pressure was too much. The light was too bright. She chose a different path. He took a sip of water from the podium, letting the silence stretch. He was building the tension, preparing for the kill shot. I hear she is remarried now, he said casually, as if it were a passing thought. To a very wealthy man, a man who can give her the life she always wanted, a life of leisure, a life where she does not have to strive, or build, or create, a life where she can just be. The implication was clear as day. I was a gold digger. I was a woman who had failed to make it on her own merit. So I had sold myself to the highest bidder to secure a life of unearned luxury. He was confirming every whisper, every rumor that had been circulating in the room since I arrived. And you know what? Silas said, spreading his arms wide in a gesture of magnanimity. I am happy for her. I pray for her. I pray that she finds peace in that gilded cage. I pray that the security she traded her soul for is enough to keep her warm at night. False pity, I whispered to myself. It was the narcissist's favorite weapon. It made him look like a saint, and me look like a sinner. All without him ever having to raise his voice. Because in the end, Silas said, his voice hardening slightly, we all have to live with our choices. I chose the work. I chose the legacy. And she chose the checkbook. A few people chuckled. It was a cruel, knowing sound. But I do not want to talk about the past, Silas said, brightening his tone. I want to talk about the future. However, before I do, I think we should acknowledge that the past is in the room with us tonight. My heart stopped. He was going to do it. He was going to break the unspoken rule of social engagement. He was going to call me out. Silas lifted his hand and pointed a finger directly at the spot where I was standing. He did not look vague. He did not look around. He pointed straight at me. Juniper, he said, the spotlight operator, who must have been briefed beforehand, swung the beam of light across the room. It hit me like a physical blow. 1 second I was in the shadows. The next, I was blinded by a circle of stark, white brilliance. I blinked, instinctively raising a hand to shield my eyes, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. "I see you back there," Silas called out, his voice jovial, almost friendly. "Come on, everyone, let us give a round of applause to my ex-wife, Juniper. It took a lot of courage for her to come here tonight, knowing how far behind she left all of this." The applause that followed was sparse, hesitant, and excruciating. It was the applause of people who were uncomfortable, but felt compelled to obey. "Juniper," Silas continued, staring directly at me through the glare of the lights, "I just want to say, publicly, that I hold no grudges. I really don't. I am so glad you found someone to take care of you. I know how hard it was for you to try and stand on your own 2 feet. I know how scary the real world can be for someone with your sensitivities." He was eviscerating me. He was stripping away my agency, my intelligence, and my dignity in front of 300 of my peers. He was painting me as a helpless invalid who needed a keeper. "I hope he treats you well," Silas said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I hope the house is big. I hope the jewelry is heavy. I hope it is everything you thought you wanted when you walked out on our dream." He leaned into the microphone, his eyes locking onto mine with a cold, triumphant sneer that only I could see clearly. "But tell me, Juniper," he asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that echoed through the hall, "when you walk through those big, empty rooms, do you ever miss the days when you actually mattered? Do you ever miss the days when you had a purpose, even if you were too weak to fulfill it?" He let the question hang there. It was a rhetorical grenade. "I hope your life is full enough, Juniper," he concluded, "because from up here, from the top of the mountain, it looks awfully small down there." He stepped back from the podium, waiting for the reaction, and it came. It started as a tittering in the front row, led by his sycophants. Then it spread. A wave of laughter rolled through the ballroom. It was not joyful laughter. It was the laughter of exclusion. It was the sound of a tribe rejecting an outsider. They were laughing at the woman who sold out. They were laughing at the failure. They were laughing at me. I stood frozen in the spotlight. I could feel the heat of the bulb on my skin. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room boring into me. The emerald dress felt heavy, like a lead weight dragging me down. The diamond around my neck felt like a noose. Silas stood on the stage, basking in the sound of my humiliation. He adjusted his cufflinks, a smug satisfaction radiating from him. He had done it. He had neutralized the threat. He had turned me into a joke, a cautionary tale, a punchline. In his mind, the game was over. He had won. But as the laughter washed over me, something strange happened. The shame, which had been threatening to drown me all night, suddenly evaporated. It was burned away by the sheer, absolute audacity of his lies. I looked at him preening, arrogant, mediocre Silas Thorne, and I did not see a monster anymore. I saw a fraud. I saw a man so terrified of his own inadequacy that he had to stand on a stage and bully a woman to feel tall. I looked around at the laughing crowd. They were not evil. They were just sheep. They were following the loudest voice. They did not know the truth because I had never told them. I had been silent for 8 years. I had let him write the story. I had let him direct the play. No more. The voice in my head said, "It sounded like Elias. No more hiding." I lowered my hand from my eyes. I stood up straight, pulling my shoulders back until my posture was perfect. I did not look down. I did not run. I looked directly at Silas, and I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was not a polite smile. It was the smile of a demolition expert who has just pressed the detonator and is waiting for the building to fall. Silas saw it. His smile faltered. The laughter in the room began to die down, replaced by a confused murmuring. They expected tears. They expected me to flee. They did not expect me to stand there, in the harsh glare of the spotlight, looking like a queen who had just caught a court jester trying to wear her crown. Silas cleared his throat, sensing that he was losing the room's attention. "Well," he said, tapping the microphone nervously, "enough about the past. Let us talk about the Green Tower project. My greatest achievement yet. He turned his back on me to look at the screen. He thought he was done with me. He thought he had buried me. He was wrong. I was not the body in the grave. I was the hand reaching up to grab his ankle. The spotlight finally clicked off, leaving me blinking in the sudden gloom. But the damage was already illuminated. The room, which had been a sea of indifferent faces moments ago, had transformed into a gallery of judges. The laughter had subsided, but it had been replaced by something far worse, a palpable, suffocating disdain. I stood rooted to the spot near the bar. My feet felt heavy, as if the plush carpet had turned to quicksand. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a low-frequency hum of rejection that vibrated against my skin. Did you hear him? She basically abandoned him. Sad. She looks so put together. But I guess it is all a facade. Money cannot buy class, and it certainly cannot buy talent. I looked around, desperate for a friendly face, an anchor in the storm. My eyes landed on Professor Vance again. He was standing 10 feet away, holding a glass of scotch. He was looking right at me. I took a half step toward him, a silent plea for recognition. You remember me. I wanted to scream. You gave me an A on my structural thesis. You told me I had an eye for the impossible. Vance met my gaze, and for a second, I saw recognition, but then he shook his head slowly. It was a gesture of profound disappointment. A waste, I heard him murmur to the person next to him. Such a waste of potential. It is a tragedy when a student chooses the easy path. He turned his back on me. That small movement broke something inside me. It was not the loud insults that hurt the most. It was the quiet revocation of respect from the people I admired. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, a hollowness where my pride used to be. The emerald dress, the diamond necklace, they felt like costumes now. I was a child playing dress-up in a room full of adults who knew I didn't belong. Then, the crowd parted. Silas was coming off the stage. He moved with the swagger of a gladiator who had just slain the lion. He handed the microphone to an assistant and walked straight toward me. The crowd made way for him, offering pats on the back and murmurs of, "Great speech, Silas," and "So brave of you to share that." He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. His eyes were bright with adrenaline and cruelty. He was high on his own performance. "Well," he said, his voice low and intimate, pitched so only I could hear. "I think that went well. Don't you?" I stared at him, my mouth opening to speak. But no sound came out. My throat felt constricted, as if a hand were squeezing my windpipe. The injustice was so vast, so encompassing. That language failed me. How do you argue with a lie that everyone has already accepted as truth? "Look at you," Silas whispered, stepping closer. He looked down at me with a sneer that was terrifying in its familiarity. "You are shaking. You are always shaking, Juniper. You were shaking when you drew the lines. You were shaking when you presented, and you are shaking now." He leaned in, his breath hot against my ear. "See, I told you. You are nothing without me. You are just a scared little girl in a big, scary world. You thought you could come here and, show me up, prove you are happy. All you did was remind everyone why I had to leave you." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes hot, angry tears that I fought desperately to suppress. "Get out," Silas hissed. "Go back to your sugar daddy. Go back to your empty life. Leave the real work to the people who matter. If you are not gone in 5 minutes, I will have security escort you out for causing a disturbance. And trust me, you do not want to be dragged out of here. It would be untidy." I looked past him and saw Bella standing a few feet away. She was wringing her hands, her eyes wide with panic. She looked from Silas to me, her expression a silent scream for help. She wanted to intervene. I could see it. She wanted to say something, anything to stop him. But fear had sewn her mouth shut. She took a tiny step forward, then froze as Silas shot a glare over his shoulder. She shrank back, looking at the floor, defeated. Seeing her fear mirrored my own paralysis. It was a loop, a cycle of abuse spinning endlessly, crushing everyone caught in its gears. The room began to spin, the faces of the guests, the laughing women, the judgmental professors, the sneering men blurred into a kaleidoscope of hostility. The walls of the ballroom seemed to be closing in. The ceiling lowering. I felt small. I felt microscopic. I felt like I was shrinking, dissolving into the floorboards, disappearing entirely. He is right. A treacherous voice in my head whispered, "You are nothing. You are a fraud. You should never have come." I took a stumbling step back, my heel catching on the carpet. I needed air. I needed to run. I needed to be anywhere but here. Silas saw my retreat and smiled. It was the smile of a predator who knows the chase is over. He reached out a hand, palm up, in a gesture of mock chivalry. "Come on," he said loudly. For the benefit of the audience, "Let me help you find the door. June, you look a little faint. It has been a long night for you." He was going to touch me. He was going to put his hand on my arm and lead me out like an invalid, cementing the image of the crazy ex-wife in everyone's mind forever. It was the final humiliation, the final nail in the coffin of my reputation. I watched his hand coming toward me in slow motion. I wanted to slap it away. I wanted to scream. But my limbs felt like lead. I was trapped in a nightmare where I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't fight. His fingers were inches from my bare arm. I closed my eyes, bracing for the contact, bracing for the shame. And then, the air in the room changed. It was not a sound. It was a pressure drop. It was as if a vacuum had been opened, sucking all the oxygen out of the ballroom in a single instant. The hair on my arms stood up, a chill, sharp and electric, swept through the space, silencing the chatter, freezing the laughter. Silas's hand stopped in midair. He frowned, sensing the shift, and turned his head toward the entrance. The double doors at the far end of the ballroom, which had been closed all night, swung open. They did not just open. They flew wide as if pushed by a gale-force wind. They banged against the walls with a thunderous crack that echoed like a gunshot. The noise of the party died instantly. 300 heads turned. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright lights of the lobby, stood a figure. He was not just a man. In that moment, he looked like a force of nature. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a tuxedo that was cut so sharply it could have drawn blood. But it was not his clothes that commanded the room. It was his stillness. He stood there, unmoving, scanning the crowd with a gaze that was calm, deliberate, and terrifyingly intense. It was Elias. He did not look like the gentle woodworker who made me coffee in the mornings. He did not look like the man who laughed at bad puns. He looked like the titan of industry. He looked like the man who could move markets with a phone call. He looked like a king who had just found wolves in his garden. He stepped into the room. The silence that followed the opening of the doors was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, and vibrating with a frequency that made the teeth of every person in the room ache. I stood there, shivering in my emerald dress, and watched the arrival of the cavalry. It was not just Elias. In my panic, I had not registered the phalanx that moved with him. But now, as my vision cleared, I saw the machine of Vane Industries in motion. Flanking him were 4 of his senior executive assistants, men and women dressed in slate-gray suits that whispered of competence and non-disclosure agreements. Behind them stood 2 security detail officers, massive and immobile, their eyes scanning the perimeter with the detached efficiency of predator drones. This was not a husband picking up his wife from a party. This was a head of state entering a hostile territory. The contrast between Silas and Elias was so sharp it was almost violent. Silas was all high-gloss finish and desperate energy. He was the flashy sports car that revved its engine at red lights to make sure people were looking. He was new money, in the worst sense loud, brittle, and constantly terrified that someone would ask to see the receipts. Elias was different. He was the mountain the road was built on. He did not need to shine because he possessed gravity. He wore his power like a second skin, comfortable and worn in. He did not look at the room to see who was watching him. He looked at the room to see if it met his standards, and judging by the curl of his lip, the obsidian grand ballroom did not. The whispers began again, but the tone had shifted entirely. The sneering malice was gone, replaced by a frantic, breathless awe. "That is Elias Vane," a woman near the buffet line hissed, clutching her pearls. "I saw him on the cover of Forbes last month. They called him the Silent Architect." "What is he doing here?" a man replied, his voice trembling. "Does he know Silas? Look at the way he walks. That is a man who owns the pavement." Silas, standing in front of me, seemed to undergo a physical transformation. The arrogance that had puffed him up just seconds ago deflated instantly. His eyes darted from Elias to the entourage, and I saw the wheels in his head spinning frantically. He was running the calculations. He knew Vane Industries was the only entity with deep enough pockets to fund his Green Tower project. He had been trying to get a meeting with Elias for 6 months, and now, the golden goose had walked right into his slaughterhouse. Silas did not know why Elias was here. He was too narcissistically blinded to connect the dots. He assumed, in his twisted worldview, that Elias must have heard about the gala. He assumed Elias was here for him. Silas straightened his spine, smoothed the lapels of his tuxedo, and fixed a bright, sycophantic smile onto his face. It was a terrifying switch. The abuser vanished, replaced by the salesman. "Excuse me," Silas muttered to me, not even looking at my face. He reached out and physically shoved me aside. It was not a hard shove, but it was dismissive. A gesture meant to clear the debris from his path so he could reach the prize. I stumbled back a step, my heel catching on the carpet. But I did not fall. I just watched. Silas stepped forward, extending his hand before he was even within reach, eager to bridge the gap. "Mr. Vane," Silas called out, his voice pitched a little too high, cracking with desperation. "What an incredible surprise I am Silas Thorne. We have an appointment on the books for next Tuesday, but I am so honored you decided to join us early." Silas stood there, his hand hovering in the empty air. His smile stretched so tight it looked painful. He was practically vibrating with the need to be acknowledged. He looked like a dog begging for a scrap from the table. "I was just telling everyone about the vision for the Green Tower," Silas babbled, filling the silence that Elias was refusing to break. "I think your team is going to love the sustainability integration. It is right up your alley." Elias did not stop walking. He did not slow down. He did not turn his head. He did not even blink. He walked past Silas Thorne as if Silas were a pillar, a waiter, or a smudge of dirt on a window pane. He treated Silas with the ultimate insult, absolute invisibility. Silas froze. His hand was still extended, greeting nothing but the air conditioning. The smile froze on his face, turning into a rictus of confusion and dawning humiliation. To be yelled at is one thing. To be ignored is a declaration that you do not exist. Elias walked straight to me. He stopped inches from where I stood. Up close, I could see the tightness in his jaw, the only sign of the fury he was holding back. He looked at my bare shoulders, which were shaking uncontrollably from the adrenaline crash. He looked at my face, pale and stripped of its defenses. Without a word, he began to unbutton his tuxedo jacket. His movements were slow, deliberate, and mesmerizing. The entire room watched, holding its breath. He shrugged off the jacket, revealing the crisp white shirt and the gunmetal gray holster of his suspenders underneath. The jacket was heavy, lined with silk, and still warm from his body. He stepped forward and draped it over my shoulders. The weight of it was grounding. It smelled of sandalwood, rain, and safety. It was a shield. It was a blanket. It was a claim. Elias adjusted the lapels, pulling them tight around me to hide the tremors that were racking my body. His knuckles brushed my collarbone, warm and rough against my cold skin. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at Silas. He looked only at me, creating a private sanctuary in the middle of a public execution. Then he leaned down, He pressed his lips to my forehead. It was not a quick peck. It was a lingering, firm kiss. It was a stamp of ownership and adoration. I felt the tension in his body vibrate against mine. I closed my eyes and let out a shuddering breath, the first real breath I had taken since entering the hotel. "I am sorry I'm late," Elias whispered against my skin. He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. His thumbs caressed my cheeks, wiping away a stray tear that had escaped. "Traffic was a nightmare," he said, his voice low, rough, and intimate. "And I had to deal with a board of directors who think they know how to build the future." He turned me slightly, tucking me into his side, his arm wrapping around my waist like an iron band. We turned together to face the room. We turned to face Silas, who had finally lowered his hand and was staring at us with his mouth agape, his face the color of old ash. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. You could have heard a heartbreak. Elias looked at Silas. He looked at him with a calm, detached curiosity, the way a scientist looks at a particularly disappointing bacteria culture in a petri dish. "And," Elias said, his voice rolling through the quiet room like thunder, "it seems I missed the entertainment." He gestured vaguely at the stage where Silas had just been standing, where he had just spent 20 minutes dismantling my character. "Although," Elias continued, a dry, humorless smile touching the corner of his mouth, "I must say, I am usually not fond of the circus, but you are a very dedicated clown." The insult landed with the force of a physical slap. It was not just an insult, it was a reclassification. Elias had taken the king of the reunion and reduced him to a jester in a single sentence. Silas sputtered. Excuse me, I am Silas Thorne. I am the keynote speaker." "I know," Elias said, his tone bored. "I read the program. It said visionary. I assumed it was a typo." Silas turned a deep mottled red. "Mr. Vane, I do not think you understand the situation. This woman, Juniper, she is my ex-wife. She has a history of instability. I was just trying to help her leave before she embarrassed herself." Elias tightened his grip on my waist. I felt the muscle in his arm jump. "Help her," Elias repeated. He looked around the room, scanning the faces of the people who had laughed at me. His gaze was scorching. People looked down at their shoes. People suddenly found their drinks fascinating. "Is that what we are calling it now?" Elias asked the room at large. "Helping?" When a man with a microphone uses a captive audience to bully a woman who is standing alone. He looked back at Silas. "You have a very strange definition of charity." "Mr. Thorne," Elias said, "but then again, you have a very strange definition of a lot of things, like success, and talent, and ownership." Silas took a step back, sensing the trap closing, but unable to see the teeth yet. I built this career from nothing. I earned my place here." "Did you?" Elias asked softly. He snapped his fingers. One of the assistants who had been standing silently in the background stepped forward. He held a sleek black leather portfolio. He handed it to Elias. Elias took the portfolio. He weighed it in his hand for a moment, looking at Silas with eyes that were hard as diamonds. "I brought some reading material," Elias said. "Since we are sharing stories about the past, I thought we should ensure the history books are accurate." Silas looked at the portfolio. He recognized it. I saw the flash of recognition in his eyes, followed immediately by the dawn of absolute horror. It was the same type of portfolio we used to buy at the art supply store on 4th Avenue, the cheap ones, the ones I used to carry my sketches in. "What is that?" Silas whispered. "The truth," Elias said. "Or, as you might call it, the punchline." He handed the portfolio to me. "Hold this, my love," he said gently. "I think it is time we showed everyone what real architecture looks like." I took the black leather folder. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. Not anymore. I was holding the evidence. I was holding the gun. And Silas Thorne was standing right in front of the barrel. Elias looked at the crowd. his voice rising, commanding the attention of every soul in the ballroom. "You all came here to see a star," he said. "But you have been staring at a reflection. It is time you met the source of the light." He looked at me, and for the first time that night, I smiled, a real smile. "Shall we?" Elias asked. "Let's burn it down," I whispered. The air in the ballroom had gone from charged to suffocating. Silas Thorne stood frozen, his eyes darting between Elias and the black leather portfolio I held in my hands. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting a birthday party and found a firing squad. You know her," Silas stammered, his voice thin and reedy. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You know my ex-wife." Elias turned slowly, his movement deliberate and menacing. He looked at Silas with a gaze that could strip paint. "Ex-wife," Elias repeated, tasting the word with distaste. "Is that the only title you think she holds? You are speaking about the vice president of design at Vane Industries. You are speaking about the lead architect of the Solaris Initiative. And most importantly, you are speaking about my wife, Juniper Vane." The reaction was instantaneous. A collective gasp ripped through the room, followed by a murmur so loud it sounded like a physical blow. "Vice President," someone whispered. "Juniper Vane." Wait, the Juniper Vane who designed the Tokyo Eco Hub. I thought she was a housewife. Silas looked as if he had been slapped. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the information that was dismantling his reality. "No, that is impossible. She does not work. She had a breakdown. She draws doodles on napkins. She does not know the first thing about structural engineering." Elias did not argue. He simply raised his hand and snapped his fingers again, the massive screen behind the stage, which still displayed the logo of Thorne Corp, flickered. The image vanished, replaced instantly by a high-resolution scan of a blueprint. It was not just any blueprint. It was the original schematic for the Azure Library, but there was a difference. In the bottom right corner, clearly visible in the stark white light of the projector, was a date stamp from 10 years ago, and next to it, written in my distinctive, cramped handwriting, was the signature designed by Juniper Hollis. "What is this?" Silas whispered, backing away from the screen as if it were radioactive. "This," Elias said, his voice ringing with the clarity of a judge passing a sentence, "is the original draft of the project that won you the Pritzker. The project you claimed came to you in a dream. It seems your dreams have my wife's handwriting." The crowd stared at the screen. The evidence was irrefutable. The date on the drawing predated Silas's submission by 6 months. "That is a forgery!" Silas screamed, his composure finally shattering. "She faked it. She is jealous of my success." Elias signaled the technician again. The image changed. Now, the screen showed a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the proposal Silas had sent to Vane Industries last week for the Green Tower. On the right was my senior thesis from Sterling University. Dated 8 years ago, they were identical. Every strut, every cantilever, every integration of the vertical gardens was the same. Silas hadn't even bothered to change the font. "The Green Tower," Elias said, his voice cold and hard. "The revolutionary project you were trying to sell me for $50 million, it is a stolen thesis. My legal team has already verified the metadata on the original files. You did not design it. Silas, you plagiarized it from the woman you spent the last hour humiliating." The room erupted. People were pulling out their phones, snapping pictures of the screen. The whispers turned into shouts of disbelief. "He stole it." "But he said she was incompetent." "I cannot believe it. The Azure Library. It was her." Silas looked around wildly, sweat pouring down his face. "This is a setup. You are trying to ruin me because I wouldn't sell to you. Everyone knows she is crazy. She can't draw a straight line." "Is that so?" Elias asked. He took a step forward, forcing Silas to retreat until his back hit the edge of the stage. "Then explain to me why. For the last 5 years, every major project credited to Thorne Corp has had a mysterious external consultant listed on the payroll. A consultant whose bank account traces back to a shell company you control. Elias pulled a document from the portfolio I was holding. He held it up. You have been paying ghostwriters, Silas, Elias announced, because once Juniper left, the genius suddenly dried up, didn't it? You haven't had an original idea since the divorce papers were signed. Silas opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was drowning, and Elias was pouring water into the boat. And let us talk about the beginning, Elias continued, relentless. You told this room that you built your empire from nothing. You said you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps while Juniper spent your money. Elias pulled another document, a bank transfer record. This is a transfer of $150,000, Elias read, dated 8 years ago. From the estate of Margaret Hollis Juniper's grandmother, it was her inheritance, her entire life savings. He looked at Silas. You took it to invest in your firm, Elias said. You told her it was a loan, but according to these records, you used it to buy a Porsche and a membership to this very country club. You never paid her back a cent. You built your image on the bones of her grandmother's legacy. The crowd turned. I saw it happen. The admiration, the envy, the respect, it all vanished, replaced by a deep, visceral disgust. Professor Vance, who had looked at me with disappointment earlier, now looked at Silas with open contempt. He set his glass down on a table with a sharp clack and turned his back on his former star pupil. You are a liar, Silas hissed, cornered and desperate. You are twisting everything. I am successful. Look at my suits. Look at my office. I have millions. Do you? Elias asked. He pulled the final piece of paper from the folder. This is a credit report, Elias said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. Silas Thorne, assets highly leveraged, liabilities substantial. You are carrying 3 mortgages on your penthouse. Your firm has not turned a profit in 4 quarters. You are drowning in debt. Silas, you are not a tycoon. You are a broke man in a rented tuxedo. Silas sagged. The fight went out of him. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He looked small. He looked pathetic. And Juniper, Elias said, turning to look at me with pride shining in his eyes. The woman you called a gold digger, the woman you said married me for money. He laughed, a short, sharp sound. My wife's independent net worth, from her patents on sustainable cooling systems and her design royalties, is currently 5 times larger than your entire accumulated debt, Elias declared. She does not need my money, Silas. She has never needed anyone's money. She is the gold. The room was silent. I stood there, the emerald dress flowing around me, the diamond heavy on my chest, and I felt lighter than air. The weight of 8 years of shame, of fear, of silence, it was gone. Elias hadn't just defended me. He had excavated the truth and laid it out in the sun. Silas looked at the floor. He looked at the crowd, but no one would meet his eyes. His sycophants had vanished. His admirers were checking their phones. He was alone on an island of his own making, and the tide was rising fast. Silas whispered, his voice cracking. I just wanted to be remembered. Oh, you will be, Elias said, cold as ice. You will be remembered as the man who tried to dim a star because he was afraid of the light. Elias turned to me. He offered me his arm. I think we are done here. Mrs. Vane, he said. We have a real celebration to attend. I took his arm. I looked at Silas one last time. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel afraid. I just felt nothing. He was a ghost, a bad memory, a footnote. Goodbye, Silas, I said. Try not to spend the inheritance on the legal fees. We turned and began to walk toward the exit. The crowd parted for us again, but this time there was no whispering. There was only the respectful silence given to royalty, and in the back of the room, I saw Bella. She was standing by the door. She wasn't crying anymore. She was smiling, a small, tentative, terrified smile. But it was there. She caught my eye and nodded. A tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "I saw," she mouthed. I nodded back. "Your turn." I thought. We walked out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of Silas Thorne behind us. We had almost reached the double doors, the heavy oak panels looming like the gateway to a new life, when the sound of frantic footsteps thudded against the carpet behind us. It was a desperate, scrambling noise, devoid of the confident rhythm Silas Thorne had practiced for years. "Wait, Juniper, please, just wait." I felt Elias stiffen beside me, his muscles coiling like a jungle cat preparing to strike. He stopped and began to turn, his face darkening with a threat that did not need to be spoken. But I placed a hand on his chest. I felt the steady, powerful thrum of his heart beneath the silk of his shirt. "It is okay," I said softly, looking up at him. "I have this." Elias looked at me, searching my eyes for any sign of the fear that had paralyzed me an hour ago. He found none. He saw only the calm, cold clarity of a woman who was done running. He stepped back, creating a physical space between us, offering me the stage. It was a silent gesture of profound respect. He was handing me the sword. I turned to face Silas. He looked unrecognizable. The golden boy of New York architecture, the man who had preened on stage just moments ago, was gone. In his place stood a sweating, disheveled wreck. His tie was crooked, his hair was falling into his eyes, and his face was a mask of sheer terror. The illusion of his success had been stripped away, leaving only the small, frightened grifter underneath. "Juniper," he panted, reaching out a hand but stopping short of touching me, likely remembering the look on Elias's face earlier. "You cannot do this. You cannot just walk away and let him destroy me. We have history. June, we were a team. Remember the studio apartment? The nights we stayed up dreaming for old time's sake. Please, tell him to stop. Tell him it was just a misunderstanding. I only said those things on stage because I was jealous. I just missed you." The silence that followed his plea was thick enough to choke on. The entire ballroom was watching. 300 witnesses holding their breath to see if the ex-wife would crumble. They expected me to soften. They expected the emotional woman narrative to take over. I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no nostalgia. It was like looking at a stranger. I reached into my small clutch bag. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of the object I had carried with me tonight, not knowing if I would have the courage to use it. It was a simple, tarnished silver band. It was the engagement ring Silas had given me 10 years ago. He had bought it at a pawn shop. Later, when he made his first million, he had bought himself a Rolex, but he had forced me to keep this ring. He told me it was a symbol of our humble beginnings, a reminder of my place. He made me wear it to parties to show everyone how grounded he was, how he stayed with the girl from the gutter. It was a shackle made of cheap silver. I pulled it out. The metal caught the light, looking dull and gray against the vibrant emerald of my dress. "History?" I asked, my voice calm and carrying to the corners of the room. "You speak of history as if it is something you cherish, but you sold our history. Silas, you sold it for a magazine cover. You sold it for a Pritzker Prize that belonged to me. You sold it every time you told a lie to make yourself look bigger." Silas stared at the ring, his eyes widening. "You told me this ring was a promise," I continued, turning the band over in my fingers. "You said it represented our struggle, but the only person struggling was me. You were just waiting for the moment you could trade me in for a newer model." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Silas flinched, but I did not raise my hand. I simply held out the ring. "I kept this because I thought it meant I was loved," I said. "Now I know it was just a receipt for your ownership, and the lease has expired." I flicked my wrist. The ring spun through the air, a tiny silver arc, and landed with a sharp clink at Silas's feet. It bounced once and settled on the carpet, looking like a piece of trash. "I did not come here tonight to prove anything to you." "Silas," I said, I came here to take back my name. You spent 8 years trying to bury Juniper Hollis. You tried to turn me into a ghost story, but ghosts do not build skyscrapers, and ghosts do not sue. Silas looked up from the ring, his face draining of blood. Sue. I straightened my spine. Standing tall in the center of the room, I addressed him, but I was speaking to the entire industry. Vane Industries is officially withdrawing all potential capital from the Green Tower project, I announced, my voice steel. We do not invest in stolen property. Furthermore, at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, my legal team will be filing a formal suit against Thorne Corporation for copyright infringement, intellectual property theft, and defamation. We have the metadata, we have the original sketches, and we have the bank records. You will bankrupt me, Silas whispered, his voice trembling. I have investors. If you do this, they will pull out. I will lose everything. You lost everything the day you decided that my talent was yours to take, I replied. This is not revenge, Silas. This is just the bill coming due. Silas looked around wildly, searching for an ally, for anyone who would step in and save him. His eyes landed on Bella, who was standing near the exit, watching the scene unfold with wide, tear-filled eyes. Bella, Silas screamed, pointing at her. Tell them I am the designer. You have seen me working. Tell them this is a lie. It was a desperate command, the last thrashing of a drowning man trying to use his wife as a life raft. Bella stepped forward. She walked out of the shadows, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked at Silas, the man who had berated her in the bathroom, the man who had treated her like a prop. Then she looked at me. I gave her a small nod. Bella took a deep breath. She did not look at the floor. She looked straight at Silas. I cannot do that. Silas, she said, her voice shaking but audible. What? Silas snarled. Do not be stupid. Tell them. I have seen you working, Bella said, her voice growing stronger. I have seen you tracing over old blueprints in your study. I have seen you panic when the clients ask technical questions you cannot answer. I have seen you crying in your office because you cannot draw a simple load-bearing wall without looking at a reference book. A collective gasp went through the room. The wife had turned. I will be a witness, Bella said, looking at me. If you need someone to testify about the ghostwriters and the tracing, I will do it. You ungrateful little witch, Silas roared. His control snapped. The facade of the gentleman architect shattered completely. He lunged toward Bella, his face twisted into a mask of pure, violent rage. But he never reached her. Before he could take 2 steps, a blur of motion intercepted him. One of the Vane Industries security officers, a man who looked like he was carved from granite, stepped into Silas's path. He did not strike him. He simply caught Silas by the shoulder and immobilized him with a grip that looked painful. Get off me, Silas screamed, thrashing like a wild animal. Do you know who I am? I am Silas Thorne. I own this town. I am a genius. Sir, you are causing a disturbance, the guard said calmly. We are going to escort you out. No! No! Silas shrieked, as another guard grabbed his other arm. They began to drag him backward toward the service exit. He dug his heels into the lush carpet, leaving track marks. Juniper, you cannot do this. I made you. You are nothing, Bella. I will cancel your credit cards. I will ruin you all. His screams echoed off the vaulted ceiling, ugly and raw. It was the sound of a narcissist facing the one thing he could not survive: the truth. The guests watched in stunned silence as the king of the reunion was hauled out like a common drunkard. The doors swung shut behind him, cutting off his final scream of, I am a visionary. The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of a spell breaking. Then, slowly, a sound began. It was not the polite, terrified applause from earlier. It started with Professor Vance. The old man set down his glass and began to clap. It was a slow, steady rhythm. Then Bella joined in. Then the students I had tutored. Then the people who had mocked me. The sound swelled. It grew into a roar. It was not polite. It was thunderous. They were applauding the woman in the emerald dress. They were applauding the truth. I stood there, letting the sound wash over me. I did not bow. I did not smile. I simply nodded, acknowledging the respect I should have demanded 10 years ago. I did not need their validation anymore. I had found my own but God. It felt good to hear the record set straight. Elias stepped up beside me. He took my hand, interlacing his fingers with mine. "Ready?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said. "I am ready." We turned and walked toward the exit, passing Bella on the way. I stopped for a second and squeezed her hand. "Call my lawyer on Monday," I told her. "We will get you out." Bella nodded, tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of relief. We walked out of the ballroom, down the grand hallway, and out through the revolving doors into the humid New York night. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like gasoline and rain and infinite possibility. Arthur held the door of the car open, but Elias waved him off for a moment. We stood on the sidewalk, the city lights reflecting in the puddles. "So," Elias said, a mischievous glint in his whiskey-colored eyes, "that was dramatic." "I learned from the best," I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. "Do you want me to buy his firm?" Elias asked casually. "When the stock crashes next week, it will be pennies on the dollar. We could turn it into a parking lot or a storage facility for toxic waste." I laughed, a free, genuine sound that bubbled up from my chest. "No," I said, looking up at the skyline, tracing the shapes of the buildings against the dark clouds. "You are not going to buy it." "I am not," Elias asked, raising an eyebrow. "No," I said, smiling. I am going to buy it when it goes bankrupt next month. I am going to fire every single person who helped him lie. I am going to burn every fake blueprint in the archives, and then I am going to rebuild it from the ground up, under my name." Elias grinned, pulling me close and kissing the top of my head. "Juniper Vane Architects. I like the sound of that." "So do I whispered. We got into the car, leaving the Obsidian Hotel behind us. As we drove away, I didn't look back. I looked forward, at the city of lights, at the steel and glass and stone waiting to be shaped. I had walked into that fire a ghost, but I had walked out a woman, and tomorrow, I had work to do. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, justice, and the reclamation of self-worth. It is a reminder that no one has the power to define you unless you hand them the pen. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from a bustling city like New York, a quiet town in the countryside, or somewhere halfway across the world? Please comment below and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed seeing Juniper take back her power, please smash that like button. Subscribe to Crimson Drama Stories for more emotional roller coasters. And don't forget to hit the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it. Your support means the world to us.